One of the cool things that I remembered you did during your time at the library was to create the Astrolabe Explorer.
Indeed. Yeah, I'll move forward a bit. So this on screen now is an astrolabe. This is a medieval calculating instrument, essentially. So it performs lots of calculating functions like sunrise and sunset at particular times in the year. So these are now kept in museums. They're studied. They're often very beautiful. They have a scientific and artistic and sometimes religious significance. And there's a scholarly society that studies them. But to find all of the astrolabes now, or they're all in different museums. So you'd have to go to one museum and search for astrolabes, and then you'd get the list that they have, and then go to a different museum and then search astrolabe in their interface, and you get a different list. What if you're interested in, there's different sources of information. There's a museum catalogue. There's the astrolabe makers will have written their own text about like a user manual for their astrolabe. Here's art depicting one of the makers in an art collection. And this is early modern letters. So this is the correspondence. So this is another source of information about someone who made astrolabes. But you wouldn't get this from the museum. These are different sources of information. So if you want to research this person, you've got to search in 4 different things, and you're not going to know that these 4 different databases have information about that person. You might not think to look in the art collection to find art depicting this person. So there's so much more we can do than what the museum database does or what an online database does. And here's another wiki storytelling. So if we're interested in Jean Fusauris, who's the inventor in the center of this graph, well, one of the astrolabes he made is in Conservatoire National in France. Another is in Museum aan de Stroom in the Netherlands, and 2 are in History of Science Museum in Oxford. So you might be interested in this person, and you might want to see things that he made that now still exist. That's a logical way to research that topic, rather than being interested in what's in one museum and drilling down, finding astrolabes, and then starting again with another museum, and so on. So the way I showed how this could be joined up was to share some data, a data set from one museum on Wikidata, and then I created an interactive app. And this is to make the point that not very long ago in my career, I bid for money to do projects to make interactive educational websites. And normally something with like an interactive map or interactive timeline would be a project in itself. You'd have to have a plan for the different stages of development. You'd have to make the database. You'd have to consider how to represent people, objects, times. If it's geographical, how you're going to represent the map. And you'd probably have to have a project manager. And if it's doing this with taxpayer money, you've got to have a program manager and levels of people about monitoring that. And it would be something that would happen over months. But this, I basically made the first version of this in a lunch hour. So I got the data onto Wikidata, and I wanted to show in a meeting what could be done with it. And so I made this website, which you can see has different tabs. So we look at different aspects of the astrolabe collection. So locations where astrolabes were made, the timeline. If you're used to the Wikidata query service, you'll see this is just the timeline function of the Wikidata query service embedded in a page. So I've made some blank web pages essentially and some Wikidata queries and embedded the queries in these pages, and ta-da, an impressive app. And I've got to stress that the software the museums themselves are using for their catalogs is pretty old-fashioned software that we'd think of now, and just doesn't have these fancy interfaces. They can enter a date, you can't actually see the dates spread out on the timeline and zoom in on the timeline you're interested in. And you certainly couldn't see astrolabes from dozens of different museums in one interface. That's just not possible with the existing interface. Or when museums or things like the Google Cultural Institute, sometimes they have an interactive timeline or something that's really fancy, but it's normally about a particular collection. And it's normally an expensive thing created by a team of consultants who project manage and so on. Whereas this was pretty immediate. I refined it by, I developed it into a more of a proper application with its own code. So I would draw down a data table in text from Wikidata, say have a script to do that every day, and then other scripts which would display it and make a customized map or customized chart, so on. And so I was putting less stress on Wikidata, and that's probably a better way to be on the web. It's more social. But the first version, just to show people the concept, was made just with the Wikidata query service. And this was used to start off the step-by-step process of cultural change, saying, well, we can go to different museums and say, well, are your collection of astrolabes visible in this? And if you want them to be, just give us a data set or just add them to Wikidata yourself. And we went to a few different museums and said, well, we've got this collection of 300. Do you want to add your collection of 100? And now we've got a collection of 100. This other museum, would you like to add your collection of 50? And so on. So there's nothing intrinsic about astrolabes in this. Anything that is shared between different, or that there exist examples of in different collections. So it could be manuscripts, it could be particular kind of sculpture, particular kind of fashion. If there are different collections of it, then if we get the different collections to share some surface level, some basic information, we can make maps, timelines, visualizations that didn't exist before.
Yeah, I often heard you say that this was a proof of concept, right? This was just showcasing that you can create a website that is it looks fancy, it has this timeline, it has all these different tabs, but most of it at least, is generated by Wikidata queries that are quite simple. So this was to show that you can basically replace Astrolabe with any other object in the world and create this type of website. Wonderful. So any other interesting things that you wanted to share with the students regarding your time in Oxford?
I also want to say about this that I was working on pilot projects, and we were sharing sets of data on Wikidata and then doing things with those data sets, combining the Oxford data with other data, and then doing interesting things with that. But normally in a pilot project, you scrap it at the end of the pilot. You try something, and then you've done the test, so it doesn't exist anymore. But all this information, the information about the Bodleian special collections, about the science instruments, this all still exists on Wikidata. And organizations, and particularly organizations spending public money, are looking for sustainability. And so many times there's been so many projects that I've known of or worked with in education or research support, where they create a domain and they create a website and they create their own interface and maybe their own tools for browsing it. But eventually the project money runs out, and there's no reason to keep the server going, and it's switched off and you can't access it anymore. And there's actually a massive loss. So there's kind of a loss in that things aren't maintained because they were only funded to exist at a particular time, or there's a loss because it's kind of technical loss, that things are incompatible. So somebody's got some museum collections about this topic, and someone else has got publications about this topic, but they're not online in a way that you can go from one to the other. So, but that's not the case with Wikidata. When you add to Wikidata, you're adding to something which is long term. So, and is joined up. You're not just adding a data set that doesn't join up with other data sets. So people in future querying for things in museums, querying for things that were in the Middle East and are now in British museums, they will find what I've put there, the Bodleian manuscripts and the astrolabes. If there's the way people access museums and cultural institutions is clearly going to change over the next generation. And we clearly don't know exactly how. I know, virtual reality or something, will people fly through history? Maybe more likely voice interfaces will be really good. The Siri and Cortana and OK Google and those things could be much better and kind of more proactive. So what we can do now is lay down the abstract relations between things and the pathways between them, and building that web and giving people permission to remix, alter, translate, reuse in ways that we can't envisage. So it's a big selling point when persuading people is the sustainability, that even a little project, little pilot project, it's actually improved for the long term how people can access this set of information or this cultural collection.
Yeah, and I think an amazing example from the UK, from Scotland, is the witch hunt database. This was an academic database, and the students are going to meet Ewan later on, but basically taking an academic institution, like an academic database that a lot went into, that was just about to be retired because there was no money to sustain it, and then reviving it. It's in such a vivid way that no one could basically foresee. So,
and I think there are hundreds and hundreds. Yeah, in the UK alone, probably in an individual university, there are hundreds and hundreds of such projects, things that someone's developed for an educational purpose or a research purpose or combination, but they've developed it with a particular technology. That technology has gone out of date, and it's nobody's job now to update it. And I know that a problem faced by Oxford is kind of the growing number of these different services that they have to maintain. So what Wikidata offers is a different way of working. So we, instead of making a website or a access database for each thing we do, make something we publish, but add something collectively to the shared, freely reusable ocean of data, and allow people to maintain it, and it's preserved for the future. So maybe Wikidata as a project won't exist in the future, or maybe those servers won't exist, but the data set will exist in some form. Freebase, the forerunner of, arguably the forerunner of Wikidata, was Freebase, maintained by Google. Now Freebase no longer exists, but you can use Freebase identifiers and you can kind of query Freebase because Freebase has moved to Wikidata.
Yeah.
So because it was CC0, freely reproducible, it can't die. It
was a very smart move.
Yeah.
It was a very smart and brave move, I think, by Google to understand, hey, this is much better than Wikidata is much better than what we had. So let's just consolidate it and put everything we had into Wikidata and help that grow.
And other institutions, universities, and museums need to do that. It may seem to them it's difficult to persuade. Sometimes I've mentioned control, that they're wary of things they can't control. And I think we in the open movement see lack of control as a good thing, because if you control something perfectly, then it'll only do what you can imagine be done with it. And whereas other people have better. And the other thing is, it seems to be a cost, or introducing this openness, or introducing, say, a widget that makes your data available to Wikidata seems like an extra thing that you have to pay for, but actually it's really cheap, because losing your content is a cost. Losing it because it's in an access database and no one uses access anymore, that's a cost.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Just recently, with COVID-19, I was trying to convince my university. They produced a really fancy, nice video that was actually fun, but done by experts from the university about the coronavirus. And I really wanted it I wanted to be able to share it on Wikipedia, because that's where people go to. And so I kind of had to convince, they released it to YouTube, but it was under YouTube license. So I kind of had to persuade them. And it was not easy, because what they kept telling me, we're so much afraid of losing control and people doing stuff with and I'm like, you can't control those bad people anyway. People who want to harm will always do it, even if they're infringing, but opening it up opens new opportunities. And so this is the type of discussion that we have to keep doing with institutions that just don't get it, because they didn't actually have an education about that. No one told them the benefits of opening up, and it's up to people like you. So it's a great opportunity to thank you so much for this talk, and for doing the kind of evangelizing that you did at Oxford, and I'm sure you're going to continue doing in other places. And
indeed, thanks very much.
Yeah, and before we kind of wrap up, I'm wondering, because I know that you actually had your own presentation, and we kind of finished talking about the Astrolabes, but if there's anything else that you want to share.
I will remind myself what I said. There were just other examples of how I was useful using Wikidata to other people in Oxford. So there was an event about German women writers. So, and they wanted to improve Wikipedia. So I could say, well, here's the list of women who are already on English Wikipedia. You just need to translate into German. Somebody needed artists who died before 1800. They had standard reference works about artists, but they needed an authority file. They needed kind of an identifier, not just a name, but there had to be the gender and the country of citizenship, and it had to be a known death date before 1800. Well, that was really quick to do, and that gave 12,000 results. That's not complete. I don't think any set of data I've ever got from Wikidata is complete, but it's much better than nothing, and you get it for free, and you can start working with it. And probably everything I've shown to an expert has been an incomplete data set, and they'll notice, but I'll say, so you could complete it. So you have the reliable information that could fill these gaps. And that's what's great about Wikidata, in the kind of incentivizing us to contribute. So I say something's incomplete and I complete it for my query. Someone else makes a different query and they see another way that data is incomplete, so they add it in. And it keeps going, like we said with Astrolabes, that each museum will see, well, this doesn't have our Astrolabes, so they put that in, and then we get a big set. Yeah, that was the other thing. There's lots of ways in which just putting a query on Wikidata and then sending it into an email to someone prospectively could start up a conversation with that person or that project about how I could help them.
Yeah, and on that note, I'm also encouraging the students to kind of ask you questions if they have. They will post it in our forum, and I'll forward it to you, and you can answer. And yeah, thank you so much for participating. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to hear from you again, as always.
Yeah, you too. And have a good week.
And you, yeah.
Bye-bye.
See you in cyberspace.